Good afternoon, Tim. How you doing?
I'm very good. Arsenal beat Tottenham 4-1 yesterday. Today is 23rd of February, so it's a good day. I'm happy.
You're feeling a bit chirpy.
I'm that superficial.
Yeah.
Apologies to any Tottenham supporters listening. I hope you still listen to the podcast, knowing that I'm an Arsenal supporter.
You are, and you're beaming today after that victory. So maybe a first Premier League title in 20 years?
I don't think we're going to win the league, but anyway, that's a whole other podcast.
That's another podcast.
I don't think we'll do it, but we'll see.
So this week, Tim, what I wanted to dive into was something that we've been speaking about, which is around the money path and life path. For regular listeners, they will be familiar with those terms. But for anyone that's new, do we want to just recap what the money path and life path is, and then we can dive into what we were planning on speaking about for the next few episodes?
So briefly, these were terms introduced to me first by Peter Koenig, who created this whole idea around money and the unconscious side of money. And it's a simplification, but I think it's really helpful for people to think about. Whether you've heard this before or not, it's really worth thinking about. What he says is really, when we're making decisions in life, choosing to go this way or that, or do this or that, jobs, spending, whatever, we usually operate from one of two gravitational centers, right, or one or two mindsets. Money path is really when I put the number first. And the money path is like, I think if I can get the money right, get the pension the right size, or the salary the right size, or have enough income, or whatever it is you do with money or the numbers, the idea of money path is I focus on trying to get the number right, whatever that means for you. And then that's what gives me the security, freedom situation where I can live life. And Peter basically says most of us do that, but it doesn't really work because we end up always fixated on the numbers, and we never really get to the place where we go, oh, the number really is okay, and now I can live my real life. And the reason we never quite get there is what we're often exploring on the podcast, because it's never really the number, it's all the emotion tied up with the number. But as long as I'm focusing on the number and my money path, and that might mean staying in a job that I hate, or not feeling I can spend my pension because I don't want the number to go down, that's all money path stuff. I'm caught up with emotions I don't understand, but I think it's about getting the number right. So I'm stuck and not really living life. And the only alternative, which I think this is what we'll talk about more today, can sound crazy, naive, woo-woo, but actually has a very, very deep intelligence, is to say, well, what if I don't think I have to sort the number to actually follow my life and live the life I want and do what I'm really here to do? And that's your life path. And following your life path is basically, if I wasn't worrying about the number, what would I be doing more of, or more committed to, or accelerating? And life path could be a whole new job or life direction, could be just more stuff that I love in my life, more golf or painting or time with my kids or just relaxing more. And it could be many, many things. So life path can be lots of small shifts or a big thing. But it's basically, if I wasn't fixating on the number, what would I be doing and what would I not be doing?
That's a great summary, and it leads on to what we wanted to discuss, which is based on lots of conversations that I've had with clients and friends whenever we meet up, and I'm sure you've had the same. And it links and ties into this idea of being very fixated on the money path, but through our work commitments. And there just seems to be this bind or real fixation that, well, there isn't any other option because I've got to work, Shabba. So, talking to me about life path and the thing that gives me energy and vitality. I mean, you're just, like you said, it's a bit woohoo, and you're speaking kind of like a different language when you encourage someone to maybe explore these areas, because we're just so fixated on work being the be all and end all in a lot of situations. And I know that, there are people that have to work, and we're not being silly about this, but there's something that just gets in the way when you start bringing work into the equation. And I think we really need to dive into this, because it just affects so many of the people that I speak to day in, day out. So hence maybe a mini series on work, hustle culture, the narrative around the work ethic that's been passed down through religions and generations, and all of this, I think, goes into a melting pot and makes it very difficult to
Yes.
to 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 basically embrace the life path that you were just talking about.
Yes. Yes. I think that's the main point, and you said it very well. So we want to do a mini series, and we're not sure yet if it'll be maybe 3 or 4 episodes, or we'll see. But we want to look in a way what is for most people the flip side of focusing on numbers and money, which is work. Not for everyone. Some people have money in different ways, etc. But yes, obviously one of the most common and completely sort of reasonable and sensible real world responses to a lot of what we talk about is, well, it all sounds very nice, but of course I have to work. And what we want to do, we always say on this podcast, we're not stupid about money, we're not naive, but we are inviting people listening to go deeper and to notice their assumptions and beliefs about money, and in this case about work, and at least listen to this, considering that many things I hold to be absolutely true about work or money might be ideas that are deeply held in me, partly because of emotion I don't understand, and in this case because of a whole history of ideas. And so when I think I'm going, don't be ridiculous, Shabba, this is the real world, of course I have to work, we're not being stupid or privileged or naive, but we also want people to really investigate how probably their unconscious ideas about work are part of what keeps us stuck and are part of what makes it seem so hard that I could maybe step onto my life path. And what I want to say before we dive in is these are deep ideas. These are ideas that sort of inside us over hundreds of years. So just by listening to this, probably most people won't suddenly go, by Jove, I've got it, I'm going to change. But we might give you things to think about or things to question, or when you're listening to these ideas, please be open-minded and then just apply them to your own choices and decisions. And I hope over this mini series of 3 or 4 episodes around work, it will support you to free up your decisions, because money, numbers and work are so connected. But yeah, we're not going for a sort of a sensational one pod transformation. These are deep ideas, but I think they're worth us exploring.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth exploring, and is a almost like, I feel like it's like a lifelong endeavor. But
Yeah.
how are we going to get started, Tim? Where is our line of inquiry going to take us first?
I could jump in with some of the stuff I say about assumptions about work, and then you could respond from your own experience.
Start us off with the assumptions.
Okay, all right. All right. The core assumption, and again, people listening will go, well, of course, is on the money path for most of us is we have to work to get money. And then with money, when the number is okay, that's when we get to do what we want. And the idea that we could just focus much, much more on what we really want just seems impossible or crazy. So one of the things I want to look at today is work as suffering. There are deep ideas, and we'll look at those today in a couple of directions, one through language and one through religion. And again, the languages we speak have evolved over hundreds and hundreds of years, and the religions we're surrounded by, whether or not we practice them or they're our religion or we have no religion, but those ideas go deep. So it's worth thinking. I often say on the workshop, an example I use is the French word travail, which means to work. But the origin of the word travail comes from a medieval torture instrument. And it's almost like a crucifix, but it's more like a cross this way, like more like an X shape, and it has 3 sides. It's basically a torture implement. And in the French, the word kind of evolved from meaning torture to toil to suffering, and is now the word for work. And you get very similar words, and I won't try and pronounce them, in other Romanic languages. The Italian, Spanish, Portuguese all have something that sounds more or less similar, and is the word for work, like I go to work, I get paid for my work, but they all have the origins around pain, toil, and you go back far enough, torture. And then I was having a little chat with ChatGPT about this. I mean, this I already knew. And similarly, the English word work is, we often talk about labor and toil. And labor again is a suffering.
Yeah.
It's a pain. It's something that has to be endured, right? There's no sense of joy in any of these words at all. And this is what I want people to start to think about. Maybe next week we'll talk about the possibility of work as joy or creativity or something else. But first, we need to see how deeply entrenched our ideas are. So in English, yeah, you get the word labor, effort, hardship, distress.
Mm,
I was thinking, as an aside, our big political parties, the current government is the Labour Party. And although its origins were in the labour movement and the working man, and there's something very wonderful about that, I do wonder if there's something in the name of Labour which
yeah.
makes the Labour Party always feel like it's a bit of a struggle and having kind of
Well,
battles and strife and
well,
suffering. I don't know.
yeah. Well, when my wife had to go into labour, I mean, that
Right,
was, yeah. I
right.
mean,
Well,
joyous at the end of it, but yeah, the struggle in the plight, as in the name. So
Well, even that's quite interesting because my ex-wife used to be a doula. She used to work with helping women have babies. And actually, this is an aside, it's beyond our beyond our remit. But actually, even the idea that birth needs to be this great kind of struggle and
mm,
painful thing, um, even that is questioned in some kind of childbirth and midwifery circles. So that's a whole other thing.
yeah,
But yeah, labor definitely is associated with pain, trouble, strife. So we've got that in the kind of Mediterranean European languages, in English, and I won't go into it in great detail, but yeah, it seems the same in Slavic languages. The word for work is often associated with a sort of being a slave or servitude, and German language is the same effort. So we need to realize as a starting point that built into, certainly in Europe, we'll come on maybe to some other languages, work, the assumption is it is something we have to suffer, struggle, it's a bit painful, and that's what we do. And we're not aware of the kind of built-in power of those words. But I'm going to suggest they're still operating. They still have a big effect on our mindset. I can give a couple more examples, but how does this sit with you?
well, I'm just thinking of sort of like the modern industrialized world
Mm.
and the emergence of factories and, or, people going down even going down the coal mines
Mhm.
and all of that. And I'm just like, well, seems like suffering to me, Tim.
Mm.
That's that idea of waking up early in the morning, going out,
Mm.
being maybe treated badly by your boss and having to, cramped up in maybe not nice conditions. That feels like you're having to endure and suffer. So I'm like, well, maybe work is.
Well, so this is a very interesting thing because first of all, you're talking about a particular phase. Industrial revolution did take a lot of people away from communities and land and working in a very sort of different, more connected way into factories and mines, and that was horrible actually for most of the people working there. So I'm not denying that some work now, plenty of work maybe, and certainly historically was painful. What I'm more interested in is, do we carry an assumption that work is meant to be
Right. Okay.
suffering, striving, etc., etc.? One could argue, and this is hugely complex and political and social and economic, but we're more likely to put up with painful work where we suffer wherever we are in the kind of
Mm,
social strata or whatever our economic conditions, if deep down there is an assumption in our culture and our language that work is about having to endure something painful, we're much more likely just to put up with it and not imagine that work could be anything else. So I'm
right.
not saying work isn't suffering for some people. I'm saying, isn't that an interesting way to be thinking about how we spend most of our waking life? And why do we do that? And how have we come to do that? And the language is one contributing factor.
Yeah, and I can see how that just perpetuates the cycle, right? If we can't think alternatively or differently, then it's probably just going to stay the same and carry on.
Well, that's the suggestion. And
Mm,
again, people listening to this might be going, well, this is a load of rubbish. Lots of people do jobs they hate. Boom, boom. I'm not disagreeing with any of that. I'm just saying, notice how entrenched the idea that work should be or is or requires us to suffer. The more of us are locked into that view, as you say, the less it will change. And also worth pointing out that all of these words predate the Industrial Revolution. So even before we were dragging people off to the factories and the mines, we already had the idea that work was suffering.
Okay. Where do we go next?
A couple more examples just to get people thinking. In HR, your human resource departments in big companies, or if you go for a job, your payment is often called, it's comp and ben, isn't it? Compensation and benefits. And again, just think what compensation is. If something bad happens to me, I trip over a council pavement and break my ankle, I get compensated. I get something to rebalance the suffering that I've had to endure. So, and this is also true in different European languages. So even the idea that I get a job, maybe I'm excited about the job, but I'm compensated. What's the compensation? That again suggests a deep idea that my work is an inconvenience or a suffering, and my money is a sort of compensation for that. And finally, the most kind of fundamental idea of all, and I'm sure lots of your clients say this, is we say, well, I earn my living. I have to earn my living. And it's such a common phrase. And again, some people listening will go, well, look, of course you do, unless you've inherited something or won the lottery. Well, yes. And what an interesting phrase. I have to earn, I don't know what, the right to live, or earn the possibility of living. And we have to earn something, again, usually through struggle, effort, etc. So on workshops, I often encourage people to really look at this, because if you go into a forest or think of a newborn baby, actually the truth is sort of life appears as if by magic. It sort of comes. No one had to pay to be here. We arrive, we have life. Life tends to want to keep life going, but somehow we all have no faith at all in that possibility in the modern world, and an absolute sort of blind faith that we all have to earn our living through some sort of struggle or strife. And so without being stupid about people's experience of work or money, I'm really trying to point that these ideas go very deep, and might there be a different way of doing it? So over to you. How does this sit with you personally, your clients?
So, I mean, personally, there's part of me that's just sort of screaming out and saying, well, yeah, two privileged blokes, having a chat on a podcast about work and suffering when people on very low wages, really struggle to, and I don't want to use the word live, because I think that would mean that I'm falling into the same trap, but find it very difficult to afford the cost of their day-to-day expenses.
It's hard even to talk about without using those phrases, isn't it? They struggle to pay their bills, struggle to buy food.
Struggle to pay their bills. And I almost feel like, when you talk to people and you have conversations, I think there's just this feeling that like the money just doesn't, like the work that they're doing and the reward that they're getting for their work just doesn't get them, them very far.
No, it's true. It's absolutely. I wouldn't argue with any of that at all.
As
you know, my partner is a nurse.
Yeah.
I'm not naive about people who work hard and still struggle to heat their homes and buy food.
But what we're trying to say here is that shouldn't come at the expense of living.
Well, it's complex. So let me take a step. We are going to do another series on how some of these ideas that we explore in all the podcasts are not just individual. There is a collective money field. So I think that one of the places that we can get stuck, and people do get stuck because it's a sticky place, is when I say this and someone individually who's working 2 jobs and 16-hour days and still struggling to pay the heating, they might think that I'm saying, well, they should just go off and do some lovely job that they enjoy. And, maybe they could. Amazing things happen in the world when people take a deep breath and follow their bliss. We'll talk about that next week. But it's hard and it's scary and it's not guaranteed. So it would be privileged and stupid if I was saying, well, everyone should just go off and do all the time. That's what they love. But the reason it's hard, we don't talk about enough either. And we're going to do a little mini series on that. It's because we're all trapped in this web of ideas, right? We're trapped in a web of ideas that work is suffering and to be endured, and you probably shouldn't enjoy it. And if we all believe that, it makes certain behaviors more possible. And it also makes it harder for anyone individually to make a change. So
Yeah.
we'll talk about that later. So I guess I'm saying yes and, right? I'm saying, yeah, anytime anyone individually is able to take a deep breath and feel the fear and actually think, wow, I am going to somehow find some way of doing this differently. That's an amazing thing for them and amazing for society, because it just chips away at that
Yeah.
bigger story. But there is a bigger story, and it's very powerful. And that's why I think we should talk about it.
Yeah.
Even if everyone just starts to think about this differently, that could change things.
And just in regards to, well, of course, I need money to live and lifestyle and all of that sort of stuff. I was reading a book called The Moneyless Man just recently, and that, although an extreme example of someone who decided for a year that they weren't going to use money, and they were very conscious about even, getting lifts from people because of their environmental sort of concerns, etc. But that person didn't stop living for that year without using money. So although very extreme example, it did get me to start thinking, well, actually, you can break the connection between living and having a fulfilled life and money. So that's quite important, I think.
And so have, still large numbers of people in the world live more subsistence or more traditional ways without money, or certainly not with lots of money. Or there's a whole body of economics that talks about the amount of productive work that's done that's not monetized. So maybe I could take a step here, because what we're saying is, first of all, maybe we do need to work, but do we need to assume that work should be suffering? Right?
That's the first thing.
Right? Maybe in this society right now, it does seem absolutely that we need money, but the deep assumption that I need money, I work to get money, and work is suffering or inconvenience or struggle, that can lock me into something. One of the things that can do is it can block me from even taking seriously the idea that I might be able to still meet my needs for doing something I love. Do you see what I mean? So we're not being stupid about money, but if I think, trap one, we might say, that we talked a lot about on the podcast, is I need to work to earn money and I need money to live, right? So we're not going to look at all of that today. But the idea we are looking at today is, and the work needs to be struggle, inconvenience and suffering. What if I thought, well, maybe I do need money and maybe I need to work and want to work, but work doesn't have to be a struggle, doesn't have to be. Again, some people would say that's naive, but it would be very interesting to see if I could think differently about that. Would that open up other possibilities, other choices? Would it even encourage me to relate to the work I do in a very different way? So that's really the piece that we're looking at today.
Yeah. And I guess it boils down to what you're saying, and trying to get away from just looking at, okay, well, the individual cases can just throw up that idea in my head.
I mean, people might disagree with me and think I'm talking rubbish, but I'm certainly not being flippant. Let me give you another example, because we've tended to focus on people who have little money, right? Because you're kind of devil's advocate position question, and that's important. But let me give you another example. There are many, many people who are earning good money and have lots of money and can heat their homes and buy food and pay for holidays, who still suffer through their work.
I see them all the time.
Right. So this might be closer to because the first group of people ain't going to be paying for a financial advisor, right? But this is the point. They're still, they don't have money worries in the same way. And they can afford a nice level of material existence, but they still might be suffering through the work they do. The suffering may be less physical and more emotional, maybe more stress, maybe about burnout, maybe about suffering politics, and maybe about doing work that their soul doesn't believe in. And I've worked with many, many people like this, but they're paid good money. Now, the point is, again, those people will also often say to themselves, well, I've got, money, I'm doing okay, I'm on my career path, brackets. And of course, one suffers through one's work. Of course, I couldn't get paid or have a nice life by doing what I actually like. So they are also stuck in a different way in the modern conception of work. But they might give decades of their life to doing something that actually makes them weep or vomit. I mean, I have worked with people who've told me they've done meetings, and either on the way to or way back from the meeting, they've had to stop to basically burst into tears and throw up because they were so distressed on some level about the work they were doing. And this wasn't work that would be obviously terribly unethical.
Mm.
I mean, actually, it was kind of marketing and advertising. So, but 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 it was so at odds with who they really felt themselves to be that even though they were well paid, had a successful career,
Mm.
they were in some real inner torment.
Yeah.
And that might be an extreme example, but there are many, many, many people who continue to suffer through their work to get money. And partly, I'm arguing, think, well, that's what work is.
Yeah.
That's how it must be.
I'm so glad you presented that other side, and that's the detective work, right? Just there is looking, because I could feel myself getting caught up in I know, a bit of devil's advocate, but also, yeah, well, the people that have money and can heat their homes and pay their bills, go to work, they put up with it, but they shouldn't really be suffering because they get to,
But
you
they
know,
do.
I know, exactly. It's like, and it's so important to just sort of catch yourself in the conflating the money number with the fact that, okay, well,
People with money don't suffer, or if they do suffer, they have no right to suffer. I mean, that's something you see a lot.
you
And I
do.
see it on workshops, is people I coach, people who do have money, and then they almost feel they have what's called a double negativity because they're suffering, and then they feel bad about the fact they're suffering because they think they shouldn't suffer because they have money. So then
Yeah,
they have double suffering.
exactly.
We all
And
get to suffer, really.
and actually, I was thinking that the golden handcuffs can be a more, a more sinister kind of way of, keeping you trapped than, maybe someone, on a different income, because I think it's almost like when you get to that level, it becomes even harder to possibly imagine breaking free of the high salary and everything that goes along with it. So yeah, there's definitely problems at both ends of the money spectrum.
Well, there are, because, as we've said a million times on this podcast, it's never really about the money or the
It's never
number.
about the money.
It's about some blocks we have around life. And we might have different challenges and different problems and different limitations, whether we've got money or not. And we're not stupid about that. But yeah, again, the thing I want to come back to, because golden handcuffs can operate in many ways, and there's fear, and we always have fear of changing things. But for today, the thing we're pointing to is, as long as deep down we assume work should be suffering or inconvenience, and the money is a compensation for doing stuff we don't want to do, we're much, much more likely to put up with something that doesn't support our life
Mm.
path or our soul. And that's true whether we have money or not, because we're caught in a story. Now, at some point, I want to talk briefly about some of the religious ideas around this.
Let's move on to that, because I feel like
Yeah.
we've.
Okay. Well, I'll be very brief, or as brief as I can. So these words, money, work and suffering and etc. And then certainly in Europe, you've got ideas from both Catholicism and Protestantism
Mm.
that work also is some sort of suffering. And it's very interesting. And I'm no biblical scholar, but in Catholicism, there's almost this idea that we in the Garden of Eden, and everything was there. You remember in the Garden of Eden,
Yeah.
it's there. We're just living kind of at one with everything. And this is more like life path, actually. Everything we need is there. And then we have the fall. Then we sin. We do something naughty. And then I forget the phrase, but it's something like, is it the sweat of your brow, you get your daily bread, or something like this. In other words, this first sense that you have to work to get what you want is associated in biblical terms with the fall from grace, with sin. And both in Protestantism and in Catholicism, work takes on some way of sort of either having to almost suffer your burden like Christ suffered,
Mm.
right? So you put up with work, you put up with the hardship. It would never be something that you'd really enjoy. It's almost not quite a penance, that's too strong. But that if you can put up with your suffering in a humble, accepting way, there's some path to the sacred.
Yeah.
Or in Protestantism, it's slightly different, but their work is more about duty and the improvement of oneself and showing that you're on the right path. But in both, work becomes it's never something to be enjoyed. It's either something to be endured or it's something to
Mm,
kind of improve and do your duty and do the right thing. And you can see how both of those ideas, and I'm not a Christian and you're not a Christian, but I've been brought up in a Christian culture and those ideas are around whether we recognize it or not. The idea that work might be joy or grace, or
yeah,
that we're off the hook, or that you
yeah.
don't have to keep proving yourself, or you don't have to keep suffering, which are both deep religious ideas. We're swimming in those ideas, and I think
Yeah.
they have an impact on us.
It's almost from what you're saying, it's like being sent down to earth to toil and work hard, and that's the system.
Yeah, yeah, one way or the other. I mean, again, we can get into kind of the subtleties of what changes when you're, Protestant versus Catholic, and and
Yeah.
you're saved through a slightly different route. Let's put it
Mm.
that way. But yeah, that's the deal.
Very interesting. Quite the opposite to sort of the Islamic perspective on
Hmm.
work, which the narrations around earning what's considered a wholesome, pure income, i.e., doing
Mm.
it from not something where you're cheating or, you know, ripping someone off. So earning a wholesome, legitimate livelihood is considered one of the highest acts of worship. So there is this emphasis on yes, going out to work, but it being almost like a glorification and a form of worship in God's
So you're not
eyes.
you're not suffering because
No,
work's good in Christian traditions, but it's good because you're meant to suffer or you're meant to sort of prove yourself. But
no,
it sounds like it's different
I
in
don't think
Islam.
it is. That's never been the image or the sort of
Mm.
the narrative that's been passed down. In fact, I don't know whether there's an emphasis on enjoying work, but it's certainly considered good
Hmm.
and promoted, but not at the extent of suffering and grinding yourself into the ground. There's never been an emphasis. I think there's always been that sort of you not live to work, but you work to live, which I don't know if is obviously very different to the sort of the modern day narrative, which seems to be, that we're placed here just to work every hour to accumulate a number.
Well,
Um,
no, yeah, I think it's different in different cultures. Again, my partner's Spanish, and she says, one of the things that's very different in Spanish culture is in Spain, work's just work, and
yeah,
you enjoy the rest of life in a different way. So whether I don't know, there's probably deep origins of all of these ideas.
but definitely there's a contrast there in terms of I don't believe that there's an emphasis at all that it's supposed to be suffering.
Mm, mm,
Work is just work.
mm. So it's
It's
like
just part.
neutral.
It's neutral. It's just, if you've got to do it. Well, no, you don't have to do it. If there's other means by which you can,
Okay.
sustain yourself, then, but, yeah, I think I think it's encouraged and seen as being a noble thing.
I,
Shouldn't be frowned upon.
I think it'd be good you could dive into it and tell us next week
Yeah.
what you think, because I think in both Catholic and Protestant religions, work is good.
Hmm.
It's just implicit is the idea that it's good because you have to put up with something or you have to prove yourself or do your duty. So there's a certain heaviness, but it's still considered good. So I'd be genuinely
Yeah.
interested. Maybe you could tell us next week
Yeah.
whether in Islam it's good, but is it fun or
Yeah. Yeah.
creative or joyful, or is it something different? I think that would be very interesting.
I'll report back.
Yeah.
Conscious of time, are we
Mhm.
wrapping up this week?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe we could talk about takeaways for people because
Yeah.
we're going deliberately, we're more into ideas this week rather than practical, but I hope it's helpful for people. And I guess the takeaway I would offer people is to think about what are your assumptions and associations with work, with the idea of work, and where might they have come from? And just to kind of reflect on really the two things we've talked about. One is language around work. There's this sort of embedded metaphor that it's about suffering. And the other is religious ideas, whether we're religious or not. We've certainly in the UK grown up in a culture, and none of it at all is about work as joy, fun, grace, doing what we want. All of those ideas we're swimming in will stop us taking seriously the idea that I could choose in my life to work on what I love or go for what really brings me joy or delight. We might have a load of resistances. So yeah, I guess I'd invite people to think about what are your assumptions about work? Where do they come from? And what are your assumptions about the possibility of just doing what you really want
Yeah.
in life?
I think that's a great place to end. And I'm looking forward to exploring what a more life centered approach to work could look like. So,
Aren't we all? Yeah.
yeah, let's talk about that next week.
All right. Lovely. Thanks, Shabba. See
See you
you
later,
next
Tim.
week. Bye bye.